Hey guys, and welcome back to Gardens and Grace. Today I want to show you a very easy, very simple bread recipe that your whole family is going to love. So whether you're just getting into the world of bread making or you need a simple no-fuss recipe that doesn't require sourdough starter, this recipe is going to be for you. It tastes amazing. It's super simple to make. The beginner can make it as well as the bread expert. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. First things first, we wanna get our ingredient list and let's make this bread together. Our ingredient list here is very simple. We're gonna start with 1.5 cups water, 1 pack of active dry yeast, 3 cups of flour, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, and whatever other seasonings you would like to use. So here I start with lukewarm water. Now lukewarm water is very important because we do not want the water to be too hot and we do not want the water to be too cold. We need it lukewarm in order for the active dry yeast to come alive and work. The next thing we're gonna add in is 1 pack of active dry yeast. We only need 1 pack for this recipe, and the consistency of the active dry yeast, it's gonna look like light colored mud. You want to see a few little bubbles in there. That tells us that the active dry yeast is working and then everything has come together well. Here's a good shot of what it should look like once you've mixed it together well. The next thing we're gonna wanna do is add in our seasoning. So here I'm using a pink Himalayan salt. You could also use a sea salt here, that would work very well, but I have a lot of pink Himalayan salt laying around, so I'm using that today. You're gonna wanna add about 1.5 teaspoons. Now, if you really don't wanna add that much salt, you can reduce it a little bit. The thing is, you don't wanna reduce it too much though, because our bread really needs the salt to have flavor. If we try to omit it or we use too little, we're not going to have any flavor in our bread. The next thing I'm adding here is garlic powder. You'll notice that in all of my recipes I do salt, pepper, garlic powder. That's my base for anything that I'm cooking. You don't have to add that. You can add whatever you want here. I'm using some fresh ground black pepper, nothing fancy, and I'm not going to overdo it with the black pepper because I don't want the black pepper to overpower the flavor of the bread. So I just add in a little bit. My kids actually normally call this our pizza bread. This is a bread I make all the time. I'm adding in some parsley next. I really just use this for the green flakes. I like the way that it looks in the bread dough. I normally add in a lot of Italian seasonings to this bread, and I keep it pretty simple. It kind of, like I said, reminds my kids of pizza. So I don't have any Italian seasoning today, so I'm just substituting other things that I have in my kitchen. You could totally do the same thing. Use your favorite seasonings, use whatever's handy, and just add whatever seasonings your heart desires. You could make something like a sweetbread by adding, maybe just the salt and then some cinnamon, and at the end, once it's done cooking, you could melt some honey butter over the top of it. That would be really nice. You could go to the other end of the spectrum and make a very savory bread by adding in some onion powder or even little pieces of chopped up onion and garlic. This is the base of the bread, and you could customize it and make it your own. The next thing we're going to do is add in 3 cups of flour. This recipe is really easy to remember because if you just remember that the water ratio is half of the flour ratio. So we're going to do 3 cups of flour. We did 1.5 cups of water, 1 packet of active dry yeast, the 1.5 teaspoons of salt, and then whatever seasonings we want. So I just used the same measuring cup that I had for my water. I wiped it out just to make sure it was dry so that the flour doesn't stick to the sides. That way I can see exactly how much flour I'm putting into the mixture. I'm gonna pour it directly into the water. And when you do this, it's really important that you pour slowly so that you don't get a whole bunch of white powder splash back everywhere. I've done that so many times. So pour slowly to put your flour into your water mixture. The next thing we're gonna do is mix it all together. Now we wanna mix very well. It's important we don't use a whisk here. That's just not gonna work well. I'm using a flat wooden spoon. You could also use just maybe a regular spoon, like a large regular spoon, that would work. I like the flat wooden spoon, and I have one, so I use it every chance that I get. And we're gonna just mix well to combine. Now you're gonna notice that as you mix this, it begins to get harder and harder to mix. That's what's supposed to happen. The dough is actually gonna be a little bit wetter probably than you're used to, and that's okay. We want that slightly wetter dough because it's gonna be wet. It's gonna be easier for us to work with. We're not going to do as much kneading, and we're not going to have to do as much work to form it. We're really just going to be shaping it instead of working the dough super hard. So, and if you're worried about kneading, don't worry about it. We're going to do very basic, very minimal, very little kneading in this recipe. There's nothing to it, I promise. Anybody can do this. My daughter does this all the time. She's a child, so there's nothing to worry about. But the important thing is to get it mixed really well. You'll notice as you're mixing it that if you did it right, everything is coming kind of off the sides. You're moving it around to get everything off the sides and all connected together, get the dough all formed together. And then once we're done with that, we're gonna let it rise for about 2 hours. So it should look like this. The bowl should be fairly clean. And we're gonna let that rise for about 2 hours. I'm adding some plastic wrap here, some saran wrap. You'll notice over that I also put a towel. It's important that you have a big enough bowl for this because that dough is gonna rise, and it's gonna rise very well. So if your bowl's not big enough, it will actually rise up to the plastic and stick to the plastic. If it does, that's no big deal. It's just gonna make a little bit more of a mess. So I'm using a fairly big bowl. Like I said, I put that towel on the top. I'm gonna set it on the counter and I'm gonna let it rise for 2 hours. Now that we're done with the rise, it's time to form and shape our dough. So you'll notice it should look like this. It's about doubled in size from what it was, and that's about what we want. We don't want to let it rise too long. There's just no need. And now we're going to flour our surface really well. This is important because this dough is wet. We want to use our flour to kind of dry it out as we're forming and working it. This will eliminate the need for us to do a lot of kneading. So we're gonna put it on the surface, and if you notice the bowl, it looks pretty clean. That's what you want it to look like. Now I put it on that very floured surface, and I'm just kind of moving it around. I'm just using one hand here so you can kind of see it a little bit better. And then I'm gonna start, as I kind of coat it in the flour, I'm gonna start flattening it out, folding it, and then picking it up and folding it again. And as I do this, it's going to become easier and easier to work with. If you were going to use something like a Dutch oven, you would want to work this into a round ball and then just kind of flatten it out a little bit. I'm using a loaf pan, so you're going to notice that mine's going to look a little bit more like a log, which is, again, for the fact that I'm using a loaf pan, but you could totally do this with a Dutch oven. Important note about using a Dutch oven though, you're probably going to want to increase the heat on your stove, and when we get to that, you'll see the temperature I use to just go up about another 25 degrees. And then also you're going to probably want to increase your time a little bit and take the lid off of the Dutch oven toward the end just so that it browns up really well. But anyway, I'm forming the dough. You'll kind of see I'm working it with my hands, kind of stretching it out, and then I lay it back down, fold it some more. This is no big deal. You don't have to stress about the technique here because, like I said, the main thing is that we're kind of working the dough to make sure that there's nothing sticky. That's our goal right now. We want to make sure that there's nothing sticky and that we're, all the surface, the whole surface is floured well, and there's no sticky residue left over. You'll notice if it's sticking to your hands, you need a little bit more flour on the surface that you're working with. And pretty soon you're gonna see that it's not sticking as much. You can kind of form it into the shape that you want. Here I am forming it into a log. I don't even think I cut this video, so this is like real time. This is how long it took me. Only a couple of minutes. You're gonna not want to knead it more than 5 minutes at all. Anything over that is just overkill. It's not necessary. So I form it into a log here, and then you're gonna notice I put it into my loaf pan. Now what's really important is making sure that we have that loaf pan set up to where it doesn't stick. I'm gonna use flour on the bottom of the loaf pan. That will actually leave a flour residue on the bread once it's done baking. I don't mind that. Now, if you don't really like that, you don't like that, just plain flour uncooked flour stuck to the bottom of your bread, which most people probably don't, you could use a little bit of cooking spray here. That would work just as well. The main thing is don't use a lot of cooking spray though, because you don't want to oversaturate the bread, and it'll kind of like prevent it from rising as well as we want it to. So maybe just a little bit of cooking spray, or again, flour the bottom of the surface of the pan. For me, that's not a big deal. Like I said, some people might not like it, but not a big deal to me. So now as we've got our bread in the loaf pan, I'm just kind of smushing the bread down to make sure it fills in the loaf pan really well. We're gonna let it rise for another 30 to 45 minutes, but I'm just kind of letting it fill out that pan first. Then you'll see that I add some more plastic wrap, saran wrap. The saran wrap really helps to kind of trap the heat in, kind of gives it the ability to rise a little bit quicker. However, you're not gonna wanna leave the saran wrap on the entire time you're letting it rise, probably only for about 15 minutes if you use it. You don't even have to use it here, but if you use a saran wrap, I would not keep it on for more than 15 minutes because what'll happen is the bread, again, will get larger, and you've just formed it all nicely. It gets larger and expands. It's gonna run into that saran wrap and it'll get stuck and mess up this beautiful loaf of bread that we just spent all this time preparing and forming. So you'll see here, I took mine off after about 15 minutes, and then I just kind of left it on the counter uncovered after that and let it rise a little bit longer. So really cool trick here, I take my other loaf pan, I take a separate loaf pan and I put it on the top. This will allow it to rise a little bit more as it goes into the oven, and it'll kind of like trap the heat in there, getting our bread done just a little bit faster and making sure we have an even cook. So I turn the oven on for 375 degrees and I place the bread directly in it. Yes, we are doing a cold start here. I'm not preheating the oven. I'm placing the bread directly in the oven before it has been preheated. I'm gonna set my timer. So I'm gonna set my timer to start with for about 25 minutes, because after that point, I'm actually going to take the additional loaf pan off of the bread and allow it to continue cooking. Here we go. I'm looking at the bread after 25 minutes and seeing if it's time to go ahead and take that lid off. You'll see what it kind of looks like here. It's starting to look like bread, but it's still really pale. So that's how we know it's time to take that loaf pan off, and we're gonna let it continue to cook. It should look something like this after about 25 minutes. Again, remember, we started with a cold oven. We did not preheat it. So your oven time might differ a little bit from mine just because of that fact. So here we go. I left it in for another 15 minutes after that. I realized, you know what? It's not quite what I want it to be. So I'm gonna put it in for another couple minutes. Not long. I think I put it in for like another 10 minutes and then checked it again. And you'll notice that the color now is really beautiful. It's really golden brown on the top, which is what you're looking for. You don't want it burnt, but you want it to look like this. So total cook time, 25 minutes to start with, another 15 minutes, and then another 10 minutes is what I did. So it didn't take very long at all. If you want to make sure that your bread is done, you can actually stick a toothpick in it, and as long as the toothpick comes out clean, your bread is fully done, fully ready to go. So I kind of let it sit here for a few and cool, and that's really important because we do not want to cut into hot bread. If we do, there's a good chance that it's going to be doughy in the middle, and we're just going to mess up the bread that we spent all of this time making. But I'm using a bread knife here. If you don't have one, totally recommend that you get one. Makes things so much easier, keeps the shape of the bread much better than using any other knife. But you'll see that our bread comes out absolutely perfect. It went over really well in my house, and it'll go over really well in your house too. If you made it this far in the video, first, thank you for watching. And second, please consider liking and subscribing. It will help ensure that you see all of our content as it comes out. It will also tell YouTube that you found value in this video, thereby pushing it out to more people. And if you found value in it, maybe somebody else will as well. Also, if you're new around here, please consider leaving a comment down below. We're trying to create community. I try to respond to as many comments as I possibly can. And I'd like to know that you're here and that you're with us and you're part of our community. And I would like to just be able to say hello to you. So please leave a comment down below. Thank you guys so much for watching.